we want to create a reinforcing ring around this opening. So we've created a weak spot in our beam, and we only have 5mm plate here. So we want to put a heavier plate insert around that opening. The easiest way to do it is going to be to start splitting those quads. So we can just double click, and these happen to be oriented such that you don't have to rotate any of them. You can just go in and double click. And now we have an additional ring there. And we can either use the group dialog to modify that plate by selecting all the elements. And then use the modify properties and select, say, 8mm plate. And that would be one method. I'll cancel out of that. And the other was, we can view by ID plate property, and it's all 5mm plate, but we can use the dynamic query and change it to 8. Something that can be a little handy, especially for modifying beams, because as your model progresses and you're modeling more and more of the ship, the number of beams that you've created can grow up into the hundreds. I have a model I'm working on now that has, I think, over 300 different beam types in it. So finding the correct beam that you want from that list can be a little bit of a pain. And there are a couple of ways that help with that. But in the group modify, there is also a feature here where you can grab a number of elements, and then the last one you select, you can say assign same property. Now, actually, I think you can highlight any one of these, and it's the highlighted one. When you say assign same property, everything that's currently selected in the group is going to get the property of that element. If you knew you wanted to match something over here in the model, you can grab all the elements in this area that you want to modify, and then grab that one as the last one and say assign same property. And that's very handy when you're dealing with beams and there's a huge list that you want to select from. For the bottom, we'll modify this one in a slightly different way. And this is to get a little more experience with the splitting tools here, or the refinement tools over here. So we're going to modify that opening around the bottom as well. But if we look at it, the corner of this quad is pretty shallow. It's really not a well-formed quad. So instead of keeping that corner, what we might want to do is extend this down to the next section on the endpoint and then taper it into center line there. So we'll basically add a quad, split this into a quad and a try, and then split this into a quad and a try and taper it into center line. So to do that, we'll select the split quad and try, and it wants to split this edge first, so we need to rotate, rotate, rotate. Now that's the edge I want to split, but you can see the triangle is on the wrong side. It's over here. I wanted the triangle over there so that it's coming from that edge. Now there's two things I can do. A lot of times what I'll do is I'll go ahead and split this. And let me go back to an element view here. But now that I have this, I need the quad to be on this side and the triangle to be on that side. So I have to manually update these things. So I'll go into the triangle dialog. I tend to use that one first. And I'll just modify the nodes to go from on this side, say modify, and then I take this quad and I move nodes 1 and 2, because you could see where the arrow was to know where they started. And that's the arrangement that I wanted. So let's do another one and see if I can get that same problem. When we do this end, it's got the triangle on the outside, which is what I wanted. When I do this side, I have the same problem. The triangle's on the inside. So one thing you can do to adjust that is go into dynamic query and you can say flip pressure side. And that essentially changes the direction. You can see now with the arrows in the clockwise direction, If I flip pressure side, it's counterclockwise. So it's essentially changing the normal on that one element. So I'll flip it. And if I need to flip it back, I can after I do the split. But now when I do the split into a quad and a tri, it's on the correct side. The triangle is on the other side, so I don't have to go in and edit it after the fact. And if I was concerned about pressure sides, I would just flip the two back. Go in here and split that last quad. You could align these nodes with the edge here to get a nice straight quad and a right triangle. But if I do that, when I split the next one, I'm going to have to move that one as well. And it's actually not going to make much of a difference when it's at a module boundary, because the node that I split, or the node that gets created for this quad, is going to be in the other module. So they're going to have to be moved separately anyway. Because the elements belong to different modules, so do the nodes that are used to create them. They happen to be in the same physical space, so they're within the nodal join tolerance, so they'll get the same FE tag and be treated as a single point. But for editing purposes, they're in different modules, so they're going to be different nodes. On this element, which is in the same module as the one that we just split, Maestro will see that there's already a node there and it'll use it, so it won't create an additional node. If I move this node first, it's going to see there's nothing there and it'll create a new one, because it always splits at the midpoint. Now, if I try and go in here and split this, remember it's a straight quad, so I can't rotate it. So the first thing I have to do is convert these to regular elements. And then we can rotate and split. Now here's another spot where it's on the wrong side. That's going to happen in this corner as well. So I will go in here and flip the pressure side on those two. Come back and split them. Now I have the geometry layout that I want, but things aren't lined up very well. So we can turn on nodes and additional points. And then in the node dialog, we can select these points. And if you click on one side and click on the other, I like to click like near a node, but on the element, and it kind of goes from that direction and selects the node associated with this element. So you can see I got two, the first node was the one on the insert up here. The second node was the insert side of these two nodes. And then when I clicked from this side, I got the beam 0 module, but the same point. And then we'll go in and modify additional nodes and change the Z value. We're only interested in changing the transverse value. So we'll select one of these three. And then we can just hit OK. And they all snap in line. And we'll do the same thing here. And I'll select from this side. And I'll try and get the other node by selecting from that side. And we can modify additional nodes. Click on a node over here, which is 0.3. Oh, it didn't grab that last node. It didn't change it. Now, if that happens and you need to go back in and reselect a node that you intended to move, but it didn't get selected on the previous round, when you come in and hit modify additional nodes, it keeps the last value that you used when you moved it. So you can just say, okay, we don't have to go and reselect, and it'll move it back to where all of those other ones are. So that gets rid of some of those shallow corners that we had on the quad. So this lower one doesn't have the ring of reinforcing plate. We could add that if we want. And actually, now that we've cleaned this up, we can add that fairly quickly. Just double clicking. Now these you would need to rotate if you want to use the same command. You could also use the split horizontal instead, but I'll just split those. Now that split all of our quads. Now we need to do the tris, and you see there's a couple options in here for splitting tris. You can split a tri right down the middle into two tris, or you can split a tri into a quad and a tri. which is what we want here. And we'll have to rotate it around to get the try in the right spot. But it's fairly easy, even with all the additional pieces there, to have our little reinforcing ring. And we can go ahead and view by plate property again and use that group dialog to select that inner ring of plating. And then we'll grab one of those 8mm pieces from the top and use the assign same property again. And now that we like this one better because it doesn't have those shallow corners on those quads, we could go back to element type. We could delete the upper one and then copy this one back. And that would be in the model elements copy. And here we could also use, if you select an element, we can use that add by seed advanced and click in either the X, Y, or Z on the minimum and grab one corner and then click the other corner and say add. And now we have everything from that patch. Now, that being very convenient when you just want to select a region of deck plate for assigning thickness properties. This was another use for it, and we'll copy, select the node at the bottom, node at the top, and it's a 0.5 shift in positive Y. Say OK, and now we have identical top and bottom. We did create a bit of a free edge problem here because we had this plate on end, and we also have beams that are now bridging across two elements. Now the problem is these frames are part of a strake. We can't modify them. They have to stay on the endpoints. So we would have to convert them similar to what we did with the plates, and there is an option near the top, strake beam to additional beam. And we could double click that beam and that beam. Option for splitting a beam. This yellow split bar and rod will also split beams. So we can take that new additional beam and just double click on it to split it in half. Now, all we need to do is move those nodes to a new node location, and there's already an existing node there. So if we turn on our nodes here, you can see that what we want to do is move that node from the beam to that node on the quad and try. And a little bit further down on the refinement toolbar, the very last item is merge additional nodes. And this is a really handy command when you need to clean things up like this. What it does is when you activate that command, you simply click on a node and then double click on the node you want to merge it with. So I click on the node from the beam, double click on the node from the quads where I want to move it. And if we look at the beams, you can see those nodes have been moved. And then we'll do the same thing at the bottom. We'll click on the strake beam to additional beam and convert those two beam elements. Then we'll use the yellow split beam command, split them, and then we'll use that merge additional node, click on the beam node, double click on the quad node. Now I rotated the model. Sometimes when you spin the model, because spinning the model is actually executing the set view angles command, I think it disables that merge. So if I, see, it won't let me click on that node. Even though it looks like the button is still active, it's not. So I can uncheck it and check it again, and then click and double click to merge the nodes. And now now those beams are just fine. For the elements, we would simply do the split again. And this one's facing the wrong direction, so we can flip the normal. When one of these buttons, one of these refinement buttons is active, it becomes very difficult to rotate the model. So you'll either have to hit the escape key, or you can hit the cancel button to cancel that operation, spin the model around, and then select it for continuing. So 2 of them were in the right orientation. I'll use the dynamic query. Let me turn off the nodes there to flip the pressure side on these 2. Then I'll go back to the split, quad, and try. And now I have the nodes that I want just in the wrong spots. So we'll use the merge additional node. And that should have cleaned up all of our edges.